Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I'm excited for my conversation today with Eden Harmony. She got her start teaching meditation while working in a highly demanding and stressful corporate job. Since then, she has taught thousands of people around the world how to meditate to work better. Those who have experienced meditation, the way she teaches it, praise her ability to break down dogmatic, ancient meditative principles into simple, focused mindfulness tools ready to be implemented during a stressful workday. And goodness grief, we could only use that based on how we've lived over the last 2 years. She draws upon her experience studying mindfulness at the University of California, Berkeley, and under teachers in China and India. Welcome to the show today, Eden.
Thank you, Felina. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be speaking to you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to share your story. So we'll start off. I know you're originally from Northern California girl, Palo Alto. Talk to us about some of the early education and career decisions that you made. And obviously, we'll weave our way into the reason you started your business.
So I was born and raised in Northern California. And in terms of education, I suppose it was a very typical Palo Alto education. High quality, competitive, and focused on test taking, something that I did quite well in compared to regular school and grades. So I think that was kind of the start of my, journey with higher education. And I'm pretty sure that's why I got into Berkeley, basically only on my test scores. But it was a really perfect place for me. I think it was very diverse. There was people from all over the world, lots of people at school. And that created a much more worldly and realistic and exciting environment for me. And that has served as the template for what I try to seek out in my career. And that has inspired other moves down the line after I graduated and started looking for my first job.
Yeah. I can imagine. I know Northern California fairly well, and I know it's a very competitive environment. Your degree was in cognitive science, centered in computer science with a focus on applications of psychology and artificial intelligence. Feels like you were probably a little bit ahead of your time as far as what you were studying and learning.
Yeah. I think a lot of my peers went into research or the medical field, neither of which was something that I was very particularly interested in. And to be honest, I didn't really have any concrete plans when I chose that as what I studied. I just figured that's something that I was interested in, and we'll see. And it's funny because it has been a great background for the stuff that I do today.
Yeah, I would imagine. Absolutely. So what was that first job out of college, Eden?
Yeah. So when I graduated from Berkeley, in my last year, I actually did it abroad because I was getting really tired of, 4 years just felt like a long time in one place. So I wanted that fourth year to be somewhere else. So I did it abroad. I did it in Asia, Thailand. And I chose that place because it was just really central to the rest of Asia in terms of traveling and exploring. And after I graduated, I just stayed there. And
Awesome. I love that. I love Thailand. It's one of my favorite countries.
yeah, well, sorry, let me make myself clear. After I graduated, I just stayed abroad.
Yeah.
And I I just started backpacking around Southeast Asia, doing that after college traveling thing. It was a lot of fun and it was very eye-opening. And I really enjoyed myself. I think I hit almost every country in that area, all the while connecting with Berkeley alumni from those respective places. So that's how so after about a year of traveling, I figured, okay, maybe I should focus on getting my first job after college. And I tapped into that network abroad, and I just started talking to people and just saying, I'm ready for my first job. I'm not quite sure. I could be anywhere. And through talking and exploring and traveling, I then decided that I wanted my first job to be in China for a Chinese company, a top 3 tech Chinese company. And there was like no other alternative. And at that time, it was actually really hard. I think back then it was like 2015. And back then, China was still relatively closed off from the rest of the world, at least the Western world. And it was the way the companies were structured, and I think they still are like that today, is that it's nearly 99.9% Chinese nationals, and they don't get any foreign talent. And so obviously the culture and the way they do things is just completely separate, and in many ways very inaccessible, especially for someone like me that just graduated. And I was just like, I want to work here. And but I think after I decided, I spoke to a couple people, and one of them was like, hey, I actually know someone that's working at one of these companies. Why don't you talk to them? And then the rest was history.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. And was that your role as a business development analyst?
Yes. The role itself wasn't as important to me, honestly. It was more so that I could get into that environment and experience that. And so that's why I made that decision to like only try to get employment at one of those 3 companies, because they were the best and they were the most cutting edge, and they were the most competitive, and thus the most extreme in the culture in which they were doing things. And they were doing things in a way that was very different from what we could see, at least in the US. So I wanted something that was the most challenging and the most different, as my first job out of college. And I for sure got that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How long did you stay in China?
So it's funny because I wanted something that was as challenging and as expanding as possible. And I definitely got it. It was very hard. The culture is really crushing. It is one way to put it. They have this culture of working called 996, which is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And it's just, there's that. They value a lot of face time. So you're just kind of like doing really long hours at the office, even though you're not really doing anything at times. You just are there to just show up. And then it was really wearing down on me because I was the only foreigner there. So it was culturally, it wore down on me. So I almost lasted a year, but yeah. So I stayed about a year. In China and Southeast Asia because I was doing business development. So I was traveling a lot around Southeast Asia doing that.
That's awesome. That's great. And so you came back to the US, and what did you do when you came back? Or did you come back?
So I did come back. Yes, I came back to the Bay Area. And I didn't really have a plan. I was just like, I really need to decompress. I really need to take it easy. And I tried to do that the best I could, but in San Francisco, which has its own culture, that can be a little hard to take it easy in. Yeah. And it was during that time that I was reconnecting with old and new friends as well in San Francisco. And I just shared with them how I had been teaching meditation while I was working in corporate China. Mm-hmm. Just mentioned that offhand, and a couple of them sought me out for events, and I just started teaching in the US in that way.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. So at that point, when you came back, you effectively started your own business, or were you doing it with somebody else?
No, I mean, I don't know if it was, if I really considered starting my own business back then. I liked it because I wasn't necessarily, like, people were seeking me out and inviting me to these things. And it was kind of their idea. And I like that because, especially for something like wellness, or things in the mental health field, in my experience, if it's kind of pushed onto others, it almost is a little, it feels a little off to be like, hey, like, yeah, you should meditate. So people were seeking me out, and the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. It was interesting because it was a different experience in the US compared to what I was experiencing in China. So that was fun to explore as well.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So talk about some of your work. You've worked for some of the largest, or worked with, I should say, some of the largest companies in the world: Facebook, Amazon, Square, Merrill Lynch. Talk about the process. What do you do when you go into a company and do this training?
So right now, I would say that most of the time when I go into a company, it's as a single team building event. So especially with the times now and mental health being at the forefront of everyone's brains, they are really open. All types of teams and all types of generations, I suppose, are interested in mental health as a team building activity, which is actually I think it's quite unprecedented. To be speaking about mental health in such frank ways compared to before. So they're bringing me in as a team building event. Usually it's like 30 minutes, an hour. Some people decide to continue the journey with me, and I'll continue to give them a couple classes. And what I've been exploring right now is seeing if I can put together like a proprietary program of my own to then bring into companies, which I think will be more effective than kind of like one-off sessions that aren't necessarily tied to like a directive or a goal. But I'm still figuring it out because, like I said, mental health is it's not very concrete. And so I want to be really careful in the way I approach this. I don't want to, I want to be able to give my clients room to figure out what's happening on their end, on their own, instead of me coming in and telling them like this is their problem and this is what we should do.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good approach. Absolutely. So tell me about some of these, programs, things you're working on. What is the business going to look like, in the upcoming year or so? But I also want to, before we get to that, I'm gonna go back a little bit. What are you seeing, Eden? The last 2 years, as I noted in your intro, have been incredibly challenging for many of us. And this idea of corporate culture, corporate wellness, it does feel a bit new for a lot of folks. I mean, obviously you've been teaching this for quite a while, but there is there's a renewed sense of urgency around it, just given what's happened over the last 2 years. What are you hearing people say, around this need, either the employees or the companies themselves?
Well, the managers and the leaders they understand very clearly that everyone's stressed, including them. Mm-hmm. And they understand and they can see how that is showing up in their work. Mm-hmm. That is clear.
Yeah.
I think what's not as clear is whether or not it's, how do I put this? Whether or not like investing in mental health services as they're related to the workplace are going to be like how that's directly affecting their bottom line. Mm. So for example, let's say I was a sales consultant. The problem is very clear. We're not performing as well. It's very clear. Like, let's say we're underperforming like 30%. Mm-hmm. And you hire a sales consultant and they pull up their numbers and then they hopefully are back to their baseline or better. And it's very concrete. With mental health, it's very clear. Like I think you see on my LinkedIn, there are statistics of what happens like when a workforce is very unmotivated or unengaged and how that affects the bottom line in regards to turnover, like less productivity, etc. Mm-hmm. But there's not as much, I suppose, research on what happens when when a company invests in mental health services and like how that affects their bottom line. And I think a lot of the decision makers in corporate are like, everyone sees like, yes, we have a problem, and sees like, yes, this is draining us in XYZ ways. It's very clear. But on the flip side, they can't really, there's not research to support like in what way it can affect positively their bottom line, if that makes sense. What I have is anecdotal evidence or my experience from past clients. But like I said, mental health is kind of an intangible. So I'm always looking for some tangibles to help ground it into reality, because that's kind of where everyone and my clients are working on that plane.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, regardless whether we have, statistics around this, measured outcomes, if you will, we know that the talent pool is very, very tight right now. And companies are looking for any way possible to retain those employees, bring the idea of work wellness into the business. And this isn't even just tech companies anymore, right? It's financial services. I know you said you worked with Merrill Lynch. I mean, everybody is trying to figure this out right now. How do we make our employees, happy and well and engaged and, all of these things when they've got probably 3 offers from my competitors down the street to go work for them. So I can see this being an important part of the equation for companies to, to create that well workplace.
Definitely. Well said.
Yeah, awesome. Well, talk more about, again, some of the programs, things you're working on, some of the things you're excited about for the rest of 2022.
Yeah, so I'm excited to kind of, from my end, I'm really excited to approach my work in a way that is more or only like client centered. Like I said before, like I'm not quite interested in like pushing or deciding like this is the program that people need. So I'm really excited to just kind of it's funny because, and I'm sure you'll see this speaking to a lot of people at Hera Hub. It's like whatever work that you do, we have to make sure that like we're pretty solid in that as well, right? So if I am a mindfulness expert and I teach people how to stress less and work better, you better believe that I have to be very solid in that. So I'm very excited to continue to explore what that looks like for me, all the while being open and being open to listening and absorbing in what is at top of people's minds so that I can serve them in the best way. So how do I put this? So right now, what feels really good for me is to continue to do my single sessions, continue to have people discover me. I have been publishing in my newsletter some of the more central to my philosophy thoughts, and just kind of fleshing it out there, seeing how that works out, and using that as kind of a testing ground before I package that into some classes. And yeah, just being open and just staying excited about what I do, I think is really, really important for this journey. Just like making sure it's an exploration instead of like a slog up the hill.
Yeah, exactly. And again, with everything that's gone on in the last 2 years, we have to understand that you have to, it is a journey, right? And you have to be willing to pivot. And sometimes the best laid plans get changed last minute. So that sounds like a very wise way to approach the market. Well, even if our listeners want to learn more about you or reach out to you, what is the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter where I publish some of my thoughts regarding work and being mindful about work and all of those things intersected. Just a warning though, I would say those thoughts are they're on the more extreme side. Like they're not, just be ready. Okay. If you're really serious, if you're really interested in approaching work in a very mindful way, like from the foundation up, I work with a lot of foundational topics. So yeah, you can find me there as well. And then I do share meditations whenever I feel called to. I have a portfolio, or like it's on the app Insight Timer, and it's linked on my LinkedIn and website.
Awesome. I love it. That's great. Well, I want to thank you for your time. And I just even talking to you, I feel more relaxed. You have such an amazing, peaceful voice.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.